She's the quiet girl everyone underestimated. But when they cut her hair, Maya's silence became her loudest weapon. Ready to see how she flipped the script? Watch now. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Maya Williams first stepped through the gates of Ridgewood High. She had just moved to this small suburban town, leaving behind the familiar chaos of her old life. Coming from a rough part of the city where survival was a lesson learned early, she didn't expect much from the white, polished halls of Ridgewood. It was a place where kids in designer jackets and shiny shoes strolled in groups, their phones glued to their hands, their laughter bouncing off the clean walls, filling the air with an insincerity she couldn't place. Maya was different, not just in the way she looked, darker skin, tightly curled hair that she wore natural, eyes full of stories, but in the quiet way she carried herself. In the city, she had learned to blend in to survive. She wasn't a fighter by choice, but in her neighborhood, not being one meant you were a target. And Maya had learned to fight, not just with her fists but with silence. She'd learned that sometimes it was a calmness that sent a stronger message than any punch ever could. Her new life here felt like a set of rules she hadn't been handed, one she had to figure out on her own. She could already feel the stares, the sideways glances that followed her through the hallways. There was a sense of curiosity in her eyes, a curiosity she didn't ask for. She was the new girl, the one who didn't fit. That's what they would call her, she knew. But there was something else too, something more subtle. It wasn't just the color of her skin that made her stand out. It was the way she didn't look like she needed to fit in, like she wasn't desperate for their approval. In the lunchroom, she found an empty seat, the farthest corner she could find. It was a place where she could eat in peace, or so she thought. But even here, the whisper started. It was like she could feel their eyes on her, their judgment wrapping around her like a tight, suffocating blanket. A few girls walked by, their laughter trailing behind them like a taunt, as if they were waiting for her to react. Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she sat straight, chewing slowly, staring at her lunch with the same focused calm she carried her entire life. She didn't expect them to understand, didn't expect them to see her as anything but what they assumed. Another quiet girl who wouldn't fight back. What they didn't know was that Maya had learned long ago that silence was the loudest weapon of all. The first time Maya felt the sting of their cruelty was in chemistry class. The air in the room was thick with the smell of chemicals and the soft clinking of glass beakers. It should have been an ordinary day, a chance to disappear into background, but the whispers followed her like shadows, seeping into every moment. She had answered a question correctly, the words coming from her mouth with a quiet confidence she didn't fully feel. The room had been mostly silent, save for the shuffling of papers and the teacher's drone. But then, from the back of the room, came a snort. It was low, too quiet at first, like someone trying to hold in a laugh. Maya's fingers tightened around her pencil, her grip steady as ever, even as her heart began to race. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew who it was. Nathan Redmond, the boy who seemed to think the world revolved around his smirk, and his two sidekicks, Ben and Jared, who followed him like shadow puppets, always just a step behind, always waiting for their cue. Must have learned that in street school, Nathan's voice was loud enough to reach Maya's ears, the words dripping with mockery. Her pencil paused mid-stroke, but she didn't react. She didn't look back. The tension in her chest threatened to burst, but she kept it under control. She had no time for their games. She kept her eyes forward, pretending the words weren't there, pretending they didn't dig into her like tiny needles. Ben chuckled from beside him. "She's probably just trying to fit in," he said, loud enough for Maya to hear. Maya could feel their eyes on her now. She could feel the weight of their laughter, heavy in the air, trying to crush her, but she didn't let it. Instead, she let the silence stretch, stretching it until it became unbearable for them. The teacher hadn't even noticed. She never did. No one ever did. Nathan leaned forward, just enough to get under her skin. "I bet you don't even know how to handle this place, do you?" Maya took a slow breath, her gaze still fixed straight ahead. She wasn't going to let them see her flinch. Not now. Not ever. "Not really," she said, her voice calm. "But it's not this place I'm trying to handle." She finally turned her head just enough to look Nathan in the eye. The smirk he wore faltered, just for a second. "And you're wrong," she added, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. "I'm not trying." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room fell quiet. They didn't expect that. They expected her to crumble. They expected her to let their words tear her apart. Instead, she stood her ground, not with anger, but with the quiet strength she had carried with her all her life. The day the prank escalated wasn't marked by any grand announcement or warning. It wasn't a sudden storm that hit out of nowhere. It was a quiet buildup, like the slow roll of thunder before the lightning struck. Maya had grown used to the snide remarks and the sideways glances, the ones that followed her from one class to the next, but this time, something felt different. There was a buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation, as though everyone in the room was waiting for something to happen. It came in chemistry class again. The desks were arranged in neat rows, the overhead fluorescent lights casting a dull glow on the workstations. Maya sat at the back, trying to blend in as much as possible. But even here, she couldn't escape the attention. She focused on her lab report, carefully measuring out chemicals, her hands steady and precise. Her braids, her pride, the thing that connected her to her heritage, her strength, lay neatly on her shoulders. But she could feel their eyes like tiny pinpricks against her skin. Nathan, Ben, and Jared, as always, were at the center of it all, whispering and laughing, their voices low but still cutting through the air like knives. Maya tried to ignore them, but when she heard the faint snip of scissors from behind, her stomach dropped. She knew immediately what was happening. It wasn't even subtle anymore. Nathan had always been the type to think he could get away with anything, especially with the crowd he'd gathered around him. Just a joke. Nathan's voice echoed from behind her. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she realized what they were doing. She felt a sharp tug on the end of her braid, and before she could even react, there was a sound of scissors cutting through the strands of hair. Her braid, the thing that had taken hours to perfect, the part of her that had taken so long to grow, both in length and meaning, was now falling apart in pieces. Maya's hands tightened around the edge of the desk, and for a moment, everything went still. The sound of scissors cutting, the laughter that followed. It all became a blur in her mind. It was as if the world had slowed, and in that moment, everything became crystal clear. They thought they could break her, thought that cutting her hair would hurt more than it actually did. But Maya wasn't just sitting there. She wasn't crushed by their prank. Instead, she felt an odd sense of calm wash over her. They wanted a reaction, but Maya wasn't going to give them one. She stayed still, her eyes locked straight ahead, her jaw clenched but her expression controlled. "Is she going to cry?" someone whispered. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. In that silence, as they waited for her break, Maya simply stood up, her hand brushing the strands of hair from the floor. Her eyes scanned the room, and for the first time, she saw them for what they were, small, insecure boys trying to make her feel small. But she didn't feel small. Not anymore. "Enough," she said, her voice calm but sharp, as she picked up the severed braid from the floor. "You don't get to take this from me. You don't get to make this a joke." She turned to leave, her steps deliberate, as the chaos began to unfold behind her. As she exited the room, she felt a surge of pride. They thought they were the ones in control. But Maya had just flipped the script. No one was going to break her, not with scissors, not with words, and certainly not with laughter. Maya walked out of the classroom without looking back. Her footsteps echoed down the sterile hallways, the rhythmic click-clack of her boots the only sound in the otherwise quiet school. The chaos behind her was already starting to bubble over. Shouting, panicked voices, the muffled shrieks of a teacher who clearly didn't know what to do. But Maya wasn't running, and she wasn't ashamed. She had done what needed to be done. She had made it clear that she wouldn't be anyone's punching bag. She reached the bathroom in silence, slipping inside like a shadow, her eyes scanning the room. She was steady, controlled, her heart still thumping with the rush of adrenaline that came from making a stand. She locked herself in the stall, leaning against the cold metal of the door. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brushed through the remains of her braid, now reduced to just a few long strands. They thought it would break her, that cutting her hair would make her crumble. But what they didn't understand was that Maya's strength wasn't in her hair. It wasn't in the things they could take from her. Her strength was in her silence, in the way she stood when they tried to push her down, in the way she refused to let them see her sweat. She stared at the lock on the stall door, breathing slowly, trying to center herself. The laughter, the taunts, the cutting remarks, they all felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else's life. She wasn't the one who needed to be fixed, wasn't the one who needed to apologize. It was them, the ones who thought it was okay to strip someone down for the sake of entertainment. Maya stayed in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity, just breathing, just existing in the moment. Then, a knock on the door startled her. She straightened, hearing the familiar voice from the other side. "Maya." It was Principal Anderson, his voice calm, concerned. "Can we talk?" Maya stepped out of the stall, her expression neutral. She opened the door and saw the principal standing there, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a hint of unease. The way he looked at her, like he saw something different in her now, made her feel even stronger. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a force, a presence. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Just peachy," Maya said with a faint smile, her tone laced with sarcasm that only she could pull off. "Just had my hair trimmed. Not a big deal." Principal Anderson looked at her, his eyes full of something close to respect. "Maya, you know that wasn't right, what happened in there." She nodded slowly, her expression shifting slightly. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her voice quiet but strong. "But I'm not the one who needs fixing, am I?" And with that, the door to the hallway opened, and the noise from the outside world rushed in. But Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she stood tall, her head held high. They thought she would crumble. They thought they could break her. But all they had done was remind her that she wasn't just a target. She was a storm waiting to be unleashed. "Let's go," she said, walking past the principal and into the chaos. "I've got a few things to say." Maya's footsteps were steady as she walked into Principal Thompson's office. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click, sealing her away from the noise of the hallway. The room felt like a cavern, the faint smell of coffee and freshly printed paperwork hanging in the air. Principal Thompson sat behind his large, cluttered desk, his posture tense, hands folded in front of him. There was a look in his eyes that Maya had come to recognize, the look adults gave when they knew something needed to be addressed, but weren't sure how to approach it. "Maya," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "You know I had to pull you in here after what happened today?" Maya raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. She took a seat without waiting for an invitation. The chair creaked under her weight, but she didn't flinch. "Yeah, I figured this was coming," she said, leaning back casually, as if she were in a cafe rather than Principal's office. "I didn't exactly give you a quiet day." Principal Thompson let out a long sigh. "No, you didn't. Look, Maya, what happened in the classroom, what those boys did, was wrong. You know that, right?" Maya nodded slowly, her fingers tapping the edge of the desk rhythmically. "I know, but don't tell me you're here to lecture me about how to be the bigger person. I didn't start this, and I'm not going to pretend like I didn't offend myself." The principal's eyes flickered, but he held his ground. "I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here because I need to understand. You punched Brandon, and now things are going to escalate. You don't want that to happen, do you?" Maya smirked slightly, a hint of humor in her eyes. "Escalate? Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long. I've been pushed around, whispered about, laughed at. They thought I'd sit there and take it. But guess what? I didn't." There was a moment of silence as the principal absorbed her words. Maya's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't scared anymore. "I'm not here to apologize. If that's what you're waiting for," she continued, her tone flat but firm. "I'm here because I want you to see it clearly. I'm not the one who needs to be fixed. You can suspend me, expel me, whatever, but this isn't on me. They don't get to treat me like that." Principal Thompson leaned forward, his hands now resting on the desk. "I understand," he said quietly. "I do. But you need to know that I'm not going to just let this go. I can't. I have to protect everyone in this school, Maya." Maya stood up slowly, her eyes locking with his. "Then do your job," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Do the right thing for once." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, She paused, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And by the way," she added, looking over her shoulder, "I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here because you need to start asking the right questions." With that, Maya walked out of the office, leaving Principal Thompson alone with his thoughts, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a challenge. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next day, Maya walked through the school's front doors with a strange sense of calm. The morning air outside had been crisp, the kind of fresh that made her feel like she was stepping into something new. But now, as she entered the building, it was like stepping into a storm. Whispers followed her, spreading like wildfire through the halls, and even the teachers couldn't quite meet her gaze. She could feel it, the tension, the discomfort, the way everyone suddenly seemed to treat her like she was something more dangerous than a high school student. It didn't help that the rumors had already started. "Did you hear?" One girl whispered as Maya passed by, just loud enough for her to catch it. She's the one who knocked Brandon out cold. Brandon's name had become the school's favorite headline. His broken nose was the talk of every lunch table, and as the days passed, the story grew more exaggerated. Maya wasn't just the girl who defended herself anymore. No, she was a violent troublemaker, the angry black girl who couldn't control her temper. They thought they had her pegged, but they had it all wrong. By lunchtime, Maya was sitting alone in the cafeteria, just like she had every day since her first week here. But this time it was different. A few seats away, a group of parents had come to pick up their children early, and they had gathered at a table in the corner. Maya could feel their eyes on her, heavy, judgmental, filled with expectations. The whispers weren't just coming from students anymore. Now, the adults were involved too. It wasn't long before Principal Thompson showed up. Maya had known this was coming. He walked up to her with that look on his face, the one that said he had to make a decision, and he wasn't sure what it was going to be. The doors to the cafeteria seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker as he stood there, his fingers tapping lightly against the back of a chair. "Maya," he said, his voice tentative, "can we talk for a moment?" She stood up slowly, folding her arms across her chest. "I'm guessing this is about yesterday." His face faltered. "We need to address what happened. The board is getting pressure. The parents—" "Don't do this, Mr. Thompson," she interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. "You're going to let them push you around, aren't you? These parents, they think their money means they can control everything. They think they can make me the villain." Principal Thompson hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the parents' table. "Maya, I'm trying to help you," he said, his voice lower now. "But if this goes any further, it's going to cause more damage than you realize. You're putting a lot of pressure on the school." Maya looked him in the eye, her expression cool, almost indifferent. "If they want to blame me for something, then fine. Let them. But I'm not the one who needs to be fixed. They need to start seeing what's really happening here." Her words hung in the air for a moment before she turned away, her back straight, walking out of the cafeteria with a purpose. As she passed through the door, she could hear the hum of conversation behind her, but she didn't turn around. She had done what she needed to do. She wasn't afraid anymore. The world thought they could pressure her into silence, into being what they wanted her to be. But Maya was done being anyone's scapegoat. She was done playing by their rules. The game had changed. And this time, it wasn't them calling the shots. The next week at Ridgewood High, Maya had become something of a legend. No one dared to make direct eye contact with her, and the air around her had changed. It wasn't fear they felt, but something else. Respect, maybe, or maybe it was something deeper, something unspoken that hung in the halls like thick fog. Even the teachers seemed to tread lightly, their glances brief and hesitant. Maya had become the kind of presence that made people second-guess themselves. But none of it fazed her. She walked through the school like she owned it, her head held high, her expression unreadable. It was as though she found a new rhythm in this strange, hostile world, a rhythm that no one could disrupt. Her silence had become her armor. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to fight. The power was in her stillness, in the way she moved through the school with a calm certainty, as if she knew something no one else did. At lunch, Maya sat alone again, just like always. But this time, There was no more curiosity in the glances that followed her. The students who once whispered as she passed now kept their distance. Maya wasn't just a quiet girl from the wrong side of town anymore. She was a girl who had taken a stand. And that was something no one could easily forget. The tables around her were filled with groups of students, laughing, joking, the sound of their voices blending together in the background. Maya picked at her food, her thoughts elsewhere. She wasn't worried about the rumors or the stares anymore. She had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing she could do was nothing at all. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them think they knew who she was. What they didn't realize was that they were the ones giving her power. Every sideways glance, every hushed conversation, every comment behind her back, it all added to the weight of her presence. Maya knew they expected her to break, to lash out, to become the angry stereotype they had in their minds. But she wasn't giving them that. She was playing their game, but on her terms. They thought they were in control, but they had no idea how wrong they were. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Maya stood up and walked out of the cafeteria with the same measured steps she always took. The room, which had once seemed so filled with noise and energy, now felt muted as she passed. No one dared to say a word, not when she was near. And Maya didn't need to say anything. The silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. She had already won. Maya had been walking through the hallways of Ridgewood High for days now, feeling the tension in the air with every step. The whispers behind her, the sideways glances, the feeling that people were talking about her but not to her. It was like a constant hum, a low buzz that never quite faded. But there was something else happening too. A change in the rhythm, a shift that Maya couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just the students anymore. The adults were involved now. It started with Principal Thompson, who, after days of awkward silence and uncomfortable conversations, had finally started asking questions. Maya had known the moment things changed. She wasn't just a problem anymore. She was a symbol, and symbols needed to be handled with care. It was the middle of the week when Maya received an email from the school district. It was brief, too official, and too polite to be anything other than bad news. Meeting scheduled with district liaison regarding ongoing concerns. The email subject line felt like a warning, and Maya wasn't sure what to make of it. Was she in trouble again? Was the school finally going to expel her for what had happened with Brandon? Was this the beginning of a crackdown? But when she walked into the meeting room, the last thing she expected was support. Principal Thompson was there, but so was someone new, a district liaison named Mrs. Parker, a woman with a clipboard, thick glasses, and the kind of no-nonsense look that made it clear she had seen her fair share of school politics. "Maya," Principal Thompson said, motioning for her to sit down. "This is Mrs. Parker. She's here to help us get to the bottom of what's been happening." Maya sat down slowly, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't know what was going on, but she wasn't about to give them an inch of trust just yet. "So, Maya," Mrs. Parker said, flipping open her clipboard, "we've been looking into what happened in your class and after. And I'm going to be honest, we've uncovered something concerning." Maya raised an eyebrow. She didn't flinch, but the words caught her attention. "Concerning how?" "The thing is," Mrs. Parker continued, her voice steady, "there have been reports of bullying that haven't been investigated properly. This wasn't an isolated incident. We've traced a pattern of inappropriate behavior that should have been addressed a long time ago. The incident with your hair, well, that was the tipping point." Maya felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. She had known there was more to it, but hearing it out loud, hearing the school admit that they had failed her and other students like her, it hit differently. "So, you're saying they've done this before?" Maya asked, her voice quiet but firm. Mrs. Parker nodded. "Yes, and we're going to fix it. We're starting by reviewing every incident like this, making sure every complaint is taken seriously from now on." It was the first real assurance Maya had gotten in days. The relief was short-lived, though, because she knew this was just the beginning. The investigation might lead to something good, but Maya also knew it would make things harder. The adults could see the problem now, but the students, the ones who had made her life miserable, they were still out there, But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she wasn't fighting alone. The game had changed, and she wasn't the only one playing anymore. By the end of the week, the tension at Ridgewood High had reached a boiling point. Maya could feel the weight of the entire school on her shoulders, the eyes of students and teachers alike tracking her every move. It wasn't just the students anymore. The parents, the board members, the whole community had gotten involved. Her fight had become everyone's fight. And for the first time since she'd walked into this place, she felt like maybe, just maybe, something real was about to change. The school board had scheduled a meeting. They were going to address what had happened with Maya and Brandon, what had happened in that classroom. Word had spread fast, especially after the leak footage from the lunchroom. Maya wasn't sure who had leaked it, but it didn't matter. The video had gone viral. It showed exactly what had happened. Her standing there, calm as ever, holding the braid that Brandon had cut from her hair. The impact of her punch had been sharp and brutal, but it was a calm in her afterward that had people talking. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cried. She'd simply walked out. The image had become a symbol. Silent defiance in the face of cruelty. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon, and when Maya walked into the room, it was filled with the kind of energy that only comes from a battle fought in public. There were parents in expensive suits, teachers who seemed to have lost their usual calm, and a few reporters with cameras at the ready. Maya could feel their eyes on her as she walked in, but she held her head high. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. The moment was hers to take. Principal Thompson stood at the front of the room, his voice steady as he read through the findings of the investigation. "We have confirmed," he began, his words cutting to the tense air, "that multiple prior complaints involving the same group of students were not escalated through the proper channels. Corrective action will be taken." Maya's heart didn't race, but something inside her stirred. She had known all along that this wasn't just about her. This wasn't just about one act of bullying or one incident. It was about a system that had failed, a system that had allowed the bullies to thrive unchecked. And now, finally, someone was acknowledging it. A few minutes later, Mrs. Parker from the district stepped forward, her face hard as she addressed the room. "This will not be tolerated again," she said, her voice firm. "We are implementing new measures to ensure that all bullying complaints are investigated thoroughly and immediately. No student will be ignored." Maya sat still, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. She wasn't looking for applause, but it came anyway. The room erupted into a mixture of murmurs, some supportive, others uncertain. But Maya knew that the real change was just beginning. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but this was the start. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about making others see, making them listen. Maya had learned that no one could break her unless she let them. No one could take away her dignity unless she allowed it. But she had learned something even more powerful, that when you stand tall in your truth, when you refuse to bend, people start to listen. And when people start to listen, change can happen. As the meeting ended, Maya walked out of the room with a steady pace, her head still high. She wasn't looking for validation from anyone. She had already found it in herself. The days after the school board meeting were like a ripple in a pond, small at first, but steadily growing, spreading outward. Maya noticed a change in the halls. Students who had once whispered behind her back now gave her space, but not out of fear. It was something different, a kind of respect, though unspoken. Teachers, too, treated her differently. They still didn't call on her often, but there was a hesitation in their movements, a carefulness in their tone, like they were seeing her in a new light. Maya had expected things to be harder, to be met with more resistance, but what she didn't expect was the quiet shift that had begun to take root in the school. Students who had once looked the other way now stood up when they saw something wrong. Teachers, who had been content to ignore the whispers and subtle acts of cruelty, now turned their heads when they saw it happen. There was a new awareness, a new willingness to confront the truth, and that was the real victory. She walked through the school like she had before, but it felt different now. She wasn't just passing through. She was standing her ground, quietly, calmly. Her presence had become a statement, a reminder that things could change, that silence didn't always mean submission. She had learned to use her quiet power, to be the stillness that forced others to reckon with their actions. She wasn't just a passive victim in a broken system anymore. She was part of the change. The lesson Maya had learned wasn't just about standing up for herself or about the fight she had won. It was bigger than that. It was about how much strength could be found in not responding to provocation, how much more power there was in walking away from a fight when you didn't need to prove anything. It was about realizing that the people who tried to break you, whether with their words or their actions, could only succeed if you let them. Maya wasn't interested in proving anything to anyone anymore. She had already proven it to herself. The final bell rang on the last day of the semester, and as Maya walked out of the building, the warmth of the sun on her face, she knew something had shifted inside her, something that would never go back to the way it was before. The school wasn't perfect, and she wasn't either, but she had made her mark. She had stood her ground, and now people were listening. And that, she realized, was a first step toward real change. As she walked home that day, there was a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. It wasn't just about the victory or the feeling of being right. It was the understanding that change wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was in the quiet moments when you decided to take control, when you decided that no one, no matter how big or small, could take away your dignity. Maya had won, not because she had fought harder than anyone else, but because she had fought for herself, and that made all the difference.